an interesting decision, I guess, so I'll try to do my best. So, if you look at these two pictures, one is from a photographer, Peter Besti, and the other one is a rendering from Olivia Ponce. So if you look at the, I'm not comparing how realistic these things are, but I'm trying to rather compare the taking an instant of a, human, let's say, mood. So one is, let's say, the photography. So the photographer has to adjust the ISO levels, shutter speed, lights, and so on. Likewise, the rendering person has to do a lot of modeling first, and then attributing some materials, creating the right scene, rendering a lot, and then putting hours and hours of rendering time to get the perfect image. So if you try to compare those things, which one is more complex, we can say, well, the rendering is more complex, but because it includes more technical knowledge. Or we can just say that, no, in fact, if you have the technical knowledge, it's pretty easy, but getting one single shot in photography is way more harder. So complexity is something really, really relative, I guess, and it's hard to, besides deciding, it's hard to say what is complex. But if you ask an architect, he would say that, yeah, well, architecture is way more complicated than rendering or photography. Why? Because it includes a lot of inputs, a lot of knowledge. However, if you look into a text that explains what architecture is, and in fact the size of these words are basically the number of the words that are used in that text. So briefly, the description is architecture is some kind of architecture in which architects design architectural buildings. So maybe the architects are really thinking, we're really thinking that we are dealing with complex things, but they are not that complex. And also, we are not really good at predicting what complex is. So if you look at this building, the first interpretation might be, for instance, you have double curved surfaces on the sides, whereas you have a flat facade in the front and the back. You can see that, okay, the double curved facade would be way more complicated to design and build. But if you look into the scripts that we develop for resolving and designing both sides, this is the pseudocode for generating the front facade. It's way more complicated than dealing with the complex geometry indeed. So we can also, as architects, deal with complexity, but we have a hard time to explain what is or which is more complex. So if you look into the definition of complexity, it always refers to, well, a lot of people before architects are trying to explain what complexity is. So it's basically said to be a system which is composed of elements, so they have connections, relationships, and so on. So I think my understanding, and always if you look into these descriptions, there is an issue of quantity, meaning the number of things that you have, number of parts you have. And then you have some kind of definition, so you have to classify and define those parts and their connection. So this quantity thing is, the number of things is, in fact, it's about like doing calculations. So if you're, let's say, if you say that, okay, things are less complicated now because we have quad cores, well then they will be even like easier in the future because we will have like 80 cores or whatever, 100 cores to resolve complexities if it is only depending on the quantity. So time is an issue of time. So we may say that, okay, it's not that complex because today's complex won't be complex in that manner tomorrow. But if you look at the classification of the parts, meaning defining what is building the complexity, then it's kind of becoming really interesting about in the means of design, because there are some systems that we can define and break into sub-pieces and combine them and create engines that generate stuff. But there's something that we cannot really name and classify all the time. So if you ask me what complexity is, I think that is the real complexity, that the things that we cannot understand and put into systems and resolve. And I think I prefer to talk about what complexity is not about, but